donuts. Shames you and me. You understand that I come into these places, into these rooms, for panels where it's just me, knowing full well that it'll be a small group. But I know also that all of you will tell you more on friends who didn't show up that they will regret this for the rest of their lives. Okay? This is my only demand of you. Okay? Make them bleed, preferably not anally, in regard to the fact that they missed a transformative experience, which of course this is. Who among you has been among me in one of these things? The ones who have, a couple of others you had, just afraid to admit it. Pussy. All right. I generally come without an agenda, and I generally don't have a moderator. It's Adam's laptop. Is Adam here?
No, he's going to be at the next one.
What's that?
He's going to be at the next one. He just left his laptop here.
So he thinks. All right. My name is Howard Chaykin. I am 73 and a half, which I will be until the day before I turn 74, which is really soon. And I have been working in the comic book business full-time since 1968. First as an assistant, a gopher, to a second set of hands, a ghost, and ultimately under my own name. That experience alone separates me from an inordinate number of my colleagues, my contemporaries, a number of my contemporaries shrinks daily because we're old men and we're dying. And I put my phone on silent, so I should have called my wife. She'll call and she'll be pissed. Here we go. That experience is so defining in my career that I recognize the fact that I can never, ever repay the gift that was given to me by the experience of working with Gil Kane, Ray Morrow, Wallace Wood, Neil Adams, and Joe Orlando. These are names that may be known to some of you, may be unknown to many of you. But these are guys who were major players in the comic book business from the late 1940s into the late 1970s, when there was a cultural sea change and my generation became the dominant. And the experience I had of dealing with these old guys, many of whom were embittered and angry and terrified of losing what little foothold they had, really informs my work. I have always believed and regarded myself as an unwitting bridge to those old men. And my politics, my childhood politics, I come from a very left-wing Popular Front family. And there was very little political rebellion in my family because my parents were as left-wing as I was. So there's no reason to say, no, Dad, you're wrong. None of that shit. I was that guy. My family supported everything I did in that regard on a political level. On a social level, I was of a different breed. And the link that I provided to those guys was to keep them informed of how completely out of line their line of thinking was about what was happening in my generation. It must be I mean, if this is boring, stop because I can go in another direction that's much more offensive. No, don't push your luck, fuckaroo. The thing that must be understood is that my generation believed that we were the last comic book artists. The assumption in the early 1970s was that the advent of computer technology would eliminate the use of paper, and that we would outlive superhero comic books. Because in our time, in the early 70s, people like Wrightson, Kaluta, Jones, Brunner, me, Simonson, were not really trained to produce the sort of work that was being made by men our father's age, working for Stan Lee, and they were defining the language. But we saw that in the same way that most film critics today regard the superhero bubble in feature films as either not over but about to deflate and vanish. What we did not understand was that there would be a series of confluent circumstances. There were three. One, Stan became elevated and became detached somewhat from the comic book business. B, two, Roy Thomas came along and was more open to different approaches and ideas because Roy was old fandom and was aware of all changes and of all experience. And three, there were these guys who came along about 2 or 3 or 4 years after we were, who were still diehard superhero fans, but didn't draw like Jack Kirby or John Romita or Don Heck or any of those guys. And we're introducing an entirely different way to think about the superhero comic books. And they were aided by the fact that there was a need for talent, there were a need for pages. And we never recovered. Because I had trained myself from early on to be a journeyman. My work wasn't very good until I turned 29 and 30. Because I was lazy, uninterested, and very incapable of adapting to technique and technology. And it wasn't until I left comics for a brief period, about 18 months, and developed a separate career, and a career that was ultimately destroyed by the Reagan administration, and I came back to comics, that I came to understand that there was a place in comics for technique. I had a potential, there were potentials in my life that I could learn those techniques, and that because of those guys who were coming to comics after my generation, there was less of a dogmatic specificity to what the work should look like. I don't believe that Stan is the villain that he is frequently portrayed as in a lot of current stuff, but I also don't regard him in any particularly high regard. I regard Stan as a guy who was a hack who took his rescue at the hands of others as if he had done it himself. And he was lucky to be dealing with two people in Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby who were asocialized and didn't have his capacity for personal relationships. And those personal relationships that Stan had created the myth that we have to deal with today. I'm not mentally ill, but I am not politic. I've never really had an interest I'm not really good at being nice. It's just something that, it's an aspect of my character that never evolved. I'm good, I'm trustworthy, I'm a man of honor, but I'm only situationally kind. I'm kind to kids, because they deserve to be treated well because they're children. But once you reach a certain age, don't fuck with me. And that lack of politic made it necessary for me to go my own path. The members of my generation and those who followed it, generally speaking, built careers by attaching themselves to characters that were either popular or would soon be popular under the right treatment and circumstances. And I wasn't good enough to do that successfully. I don't credit myself with this, well, I think I'll do something else just to be better. Had I been good enough to compete with Frank Miller or Bill Sienkiewicz or Jim Starlin on the level of the playing field that they made with Super Duper Comics, I probably would have done it and been happy, been perfectly satisfied, and woke up one morning and wanted to wear my career went. Because there's a mindset that exists in comics of ignoring the fact that a career has an expiration date. We are all around for a short time, and our audience moves on because our audience is attracted to a representation of newness. Not necessarily newness, but a representation of newness. And I was saved from that ghettoizing by my ineptitude. I'm quite serious. My career is based on making assets of my liabilities. Not being able to do something meant that I had to find something else to do because I'm unhireable. Okay. I'm really good in a room. I was very successful with women, but I'm been not very successful at the idea of being a corporate cog. And I've taught people to be corporate cogs after the fact. But in its time, when I was offered the potential of being that cog, there was no way on earth I was going to be comfortable and successful, being, playing the part of how to succeed in business without really trying. It just wasn't available to me. I'm much better at it now than I was then, but still, not really nice. It just doesn't work for me. So I ended up building a catalog of work which reflected my interests. And I've come to understand that the great mistake I made in there was that I assumed there were other people a lot like me. And there are other people a lot like me, but it's a really, really small collection. Because most people who read comic books do not read in the name of provenance. They do not read in the name of creative talent. They do not read in the name of execution. They are genuinely attracted, and continue to be genuinely attracted, to the narrative and structural form. Whether it's successful or not, they like the characters. And that's something that happens when you first identify comic books. I was introduced to comic books at the age of 4, and I climbed into a box of half filled with comics of all genres and became completely subsumed with this shit. It just owned me. The smell of that paper continues to remind me occasionally what it was. And I taught myself to read from those comics. By the time I was 5, I was reading at a 4th grade level. I couldn't pronounce many of those words, but I was able to parse out their meaning. I think the relationship we have with imagery. My parents were stupid. Thought I was some sort of a genetic anomaly. They never identified comics as why I was what I was. And all I've ever wanted to be in my life was a comic book man. And I had no talent, no skill, nothing but blind rage and hunger. And I was sustained by that blind rage and hunger. And ultimately it came to my understanding in my late 20s that I could, if I worked harder, if I simply worked harder, I could essentially achieve some sort of goal. Whatever that goal was, I wasn't quite sure. Because I came to understand that my standards of good or excellence were different from those of the audience. I'm on Facebook all the time because I'm easily amused. And hearing grown men and women of voting age arguing who their favorite Batman villain is gives me pause. Because it confirms for me the fact that, what? Yeah. I loved super comics as a boy. I really did, because I had all the adolescent power fantasies that were available to me. I love Batman, I love Superman, I love the Flash, Green Lantern. I would get into partisan arguments with my fellow comic book geek friends about the relative merits of Gil Kane and Carmine Infantino, and why Joe Kubert's Hawkman was canon, and it needs canon. Let's face it, nobody else can draw Hawkman. Joe Kubert needs to be dead for years. But when I became a professional, 2 things happened. I ceased to be a fan. I got rid of all my comics. I came to understand that I wasn't capable of doing the work that was required of me. So I was at sea for about a decade. And the reason I got work was twofold. A, they needed to fill pages. And B, a fact that came to me much clearer later was that, actually 2 things. One, I'm ridiculously reliable because I'm afraid of being identified as a spy, as an imposter. Okay, I don't want anybody to think that I'm fucking up. 2, it came clear to writers who were working with me that I did a lot of their work. Because early as on, I was able to take a page from a writer's script or from some writer's bullshit Marvel-style outline and concoct a page that was endowed with narrative value. Civilians seem to think, and reasonably so, that comic books are simply a patchwork of squares. Okay? And those who think that are frequently guys who wake up one morning and say, gee, I'm going to do a graphic novel today. Okay? As if it was some sort of organic process, the way a trophy wife, a third wife of a Hollywood executive, wakes up in the morning after the honeymoon and says, I feel like an interior decorator. It just doesn't play. Comics has a language. And one of the things I recognized when I came to understand that my career was going nowhere and failing really hard smart, despite the fact that I was getting work, because I was able to do that work, and I was able to make their, in my inept and crude drawings, able to translate the writer's idea. It became important, imperative to me to A, learn how to write, and B, learn how to deliver reproducible imagery on pages that were there, that in turn endowed with narrative value. These may seem like alien concepts to you, but if you hold these in your head, next time you look at a comic book, compare a page from one to another, and see which pages are simply demonstrations of facility, and which pages are there to tell a story visually, where an artist has been able to take the writer's concept and find a way to arrange images in panels on pages that in turn are possessed with narrative value. On the way over here, I was talking with John Workman, the deeply esteemed letterer, and we were talking about the relationship of comics to opera and comics to silent film. Comics gains a great deal from silent film because the language of comics was brought to the mainstream news comic books by Will Eisner, someone I personally love, but who was responsible for transliterating the Sunday newspaper page into the aspect ratio of a comic book page and creating a page that itself encouraged the turning of the page. That relationship of page to page is significant. It doesn't appear significant to the person, to the casual reader who takes for granted its existence. But pagination is an extremely important part of what we do. I'm just completed the artwork on a book on a crowdfunder, which was produced by one of our colleagues here. And the first thing we did with that was my editor then built a map. So when I look at that map and know which page we're facing which. It had already been written, but in the drawing, in the presentation of the visual, I had to know what I need to have facing pages. That if I was repeating imagery, it would have to have a justification for repetition. Like in a ballad. When Frank Sinatra sings and he sings "It Was a Very Good Year," as an example, there's repetitions there. There's phraseology, there's repeated phrases. And it's all serves a point. And pagination supports that. Okay? I'm getting into the weeds here. This is what's important to me. I don't give a fuck about Batman or Superman or any of that shit. You know, I made no friends when I pointed out that Batman is a not quite bright 50-year-old boy's idea of what a rich guy would do who had a bad day when he was 8 with his money. And you know, if you feel the need to consider that as serving that idea with ambition, God love you. You're welcome to it. But I look at Batman and it's comical. It's the that new absolute Batman that's out there with the guy with the axe on his chest and shit. That looks to me, as I said in public, what a writer would do using AI to draw a comic book that was in his mind. You know, it's just dumbassery at the highest peak. I'm sure it'll be lovely, just lovely. Not for me. And again, you're welcome to it. I don't ever tell anybody what they should like. You can like what you love, whatever you care. The song says, you can love the life you're living, you can live the life you like, you can even marry Harry while you mess around with Ike. The subtext in that, of course, is don't think you like it makes it any better than it really is. You know, I love pizza. It's not good. It's pizza. Mike loves pizza too. Mike is a pizza whore. We have traveled for pizza. So I didn't bloom and blossom until I was in my early 30s. And that meant that I set a bar for myself that I'd never been able to go under because I operated from the perspective of shame and guilt and moral responsibility. And the flag work is the work that really defines my character. And then I went off and tried different stuff. And that was a mistake of great merit because comics is a one-trick pony medium. You're really good at one thing. This is what you do. And I was not trained to be that way. Going right back to those old guys, all those old guys, the best of those old guys, were journeymen. In my definition, a journeyman is a talent who is capable of being called upon to do anything. He sits down in the morning, by the end of the day, he's done something he didn't do the day before. So you had a guy like Jack Kirby, who is the central archetype of that. In superhero comics, romance comics, war comics, humor comics. Okay? They did all this stuff. That new EC line of comics, they think EC is a bunch of science fiction books and horror books, because that's what the fans read. But the really good EC work was crime stories. Basically, were really bad marriages that where divorce wasn't an option, but murder was. Shock suspense, which was the liberal hysteria comics. And then even the new trend stuff, the Valor and Piracy work. There's more to work, there's more to life than Super Dragon, Laser Monster, reading shit. That seems to pervade the work we do. So the mistake I made was thinking that there was an audience for someone like me who was interested in a bunch of stuff. In the 1980s, I started with Flag. I did Times Squared, which is a completely batshit bugfuck take on applying the tenets and rules of bebop jazz to a nonlinear narrative. As pointed out in a review of the book, it says, here it is, Howard Chaykin once again overestimating the audience for comics. And then The Shadow, and then Black Kiss. And then meanwhile, I wrote Twilight for Jose Garcia Lopez. I did a lot of different shit. Okay? And that confuses the fuck out of you people. Because you want to have a way to identify and define a talent and hold that talent in your hand. To be able to think, this is who this is and this is what he does. And I am not that guy. I'm constantly astonished. And I ran into a pal of mine when I got here on Thursday who had posted a very despairing piece of work, a message on Facebook. My response was, you do not work in a meritocracy. You're at the mercy of an audience who, despite how we all laugh at it, you must learn to acknowledge the truth that the golden age of comics is 12. And so many of us have tastes that are codified at the age of 12 when we first see material. Then we never outgrow it, which accounts for the fact that there are 55 to 60-year-old men deciding which is their favorite Batman villain. Okay. I should explain that I was that guy, but I stopped being that guy at 20. You know, I got weaned away from science fiction and fantasy by Archie Goodwin. Goodwin said, "Don't read that, read this," and he opened my eyes to crime fiction, everything from Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, Rex Stout, all this stuff, and then went back. I have a hard time getting back to it. And when I do, I'm always disappointed because it plays by rules which bear no resemblance of what I regard as valid for actual work without the presence of Deus Ex Machina. I worked in television for 15 years, working on shit I'd never watch. But I felt that my responsibility to the work was to deliver the best work I possibly could in the context of what they needed. I moved to California the day before I turned 35, so I lived in California more than half my life. It will be 39 years, and it's coming October the 6th, the day before I turned 35. People still think I live in New York City. When I left Los Angeles years ago, I lived in a small beach town, Redneck Riviera West. People were like, what the fuck are you doing here? And there's a certain space to that. But I moved to California to work in television because that experiment of mine, that delivering the work that I talked about and just delivered, failed to generate anything other than some critical attention. And critical attention in comics means nothing at all. Because all it does is set you up to be beaten down with a stick. And I moved to California expressly because I had a fear that I was going to get this old. Okay? And I had no idea how I was going to do that. The only way I could see getting a job that had health insurance was to work as an editor. And I can't imagine anyone ever wanted to work for me. You know, can you imagine me as an editor of your work? My editorial policy would end up being, I give up. Done. Finished. Having to deal with the personalities and behaviors of comic book artists the reasons that writers are the alpha in comics today is because most comic book artists are so profoundly stupid that they think that behaving like assholes and operating as if they're rebels with a cause plays right into the game, the playbook of the companies and the corporate companies. And writers are much more part and parcel of the corporate coterie. And these artists don't understand that comic book writers, certainly now, regard comics as a means to hone their craft, polish their skills, and gain attention, and then move on to larger, bigger venues. Whereas comic book artists, by the end of the work they produce, are producing trope-based work. The techniques and presentation that comic book art calls for is functionally unusable in any other context of comic books. Even to the point when you see a piece of advertising art or studio art that's supposed to be comic books, they rarely hire a comic book artist to do it. They hire an illustrator to do the worst possible way of interpreting what comic book art looks like. That's fairly common. So I moved to California with the attempt to use my cachet that I achieved through American Flag and other things to get working in film. I ended up in television, working on some of the shittiest stuff ever. And but it's always held in high esteem because it's about shit you guys like. Super Howard, Super Howard, take Flash, get that fuck out of here. And when I got fired, it was an enormous release because I'd done my work in the trenches. Delivered, I'd done what I had to do. And I came away from the experience recognizing that I never wanted to see any of these people again, except at their funerals. And that it was important for me to reestablish myself in some other context, in some other job. And I've been away from comics for over 10 years. So here I was having to reintroduce myself to a marketplace that didn't know me, that had moved on. And I never regained whatever little commercial footprint I had, ever. So I became that old guy who's doing comics again, which in its own way is also free. It allowed me to do whatever I wanted. The first thing I did when I came back to comics was a book called Mighty Love, which was basically the shop around the corner, You've Got Mail, with superheroes. And I did it as a gift to my therapist. And the book didn't move or sell. That found no traction. But I proceeded to continue working. And to this day, I've got 28 pages of pencils waiting for me on my desk. I've got 60 more pages of a script that I'm writing for someone else to draw. And I am now in a personal and professional state, protected and insulated from the problems and rigors of having to appeal to the comic book audience. Because if I were to do work that was an attempt to hit people commercially, I wouldn't know where to go. Anecdotally, I had a conversation yesterday with a colleague that arose out of a conversation that we'd had some months back. And we were trying to figure out a way to do a book that will have at least some kind of commercial footprint, that will approach the material in a way that bears no resemblance to what's been done recently, with a lanyard, an added feature that will be completely alien to most of the audience, but will be promotable in a curious and odd way. And the end of the conversation was, we have a general idea of the story we want, the world we want to tell the story. What is the template? What is the armature of that story? Are we going to go classical? Are we going to look at Volpone? Are we going to look at Romeo and Juliet? Are we going to look at Macbeth? I mean, if you accept the fact, as some have said, there may be 8 million stories in the Naked City, but there are only 6 basic plots. What is the plot? That's our question. And I'm excited about this because it's really fucked up. It's very experimental. It's something that has not been done in comics in 50 years, but it's been done. But it's not. There's now an audience, 2, 3, 4 audiences since. I have no recollection of this. And everything old is new again. Okay. So I have spent my entire life, everything I've ever done in comic book, in my life profession, has been ultimately intended to make it possible for me to continue to do comic books. I love comic books. My wife has never read a comic book in her life. She has no idea what I do for a living. She resents when I say that, but she's not here. But it's true. Are you arting today or are you writing today? Which means, are you on the left side of the room or the right side? And it's a happy arrangement because there are too many men in the comic book business whose lives have been ruined by the fact that the women in their lives love their work as much as they love them. My wife's utterly indifferent to my creative